A Nuremberg rally. I just thought I'd jump in straight away with the Godwin's law because with this source material, the Nazi comparison is going to draw itself anyway. Anyway, I was sent this video by my favourite spic faggot, TomasAllendeConte. I finally decided to do a response to this one because I was looking for the video that actually first red-pilled me, as we say, to the problems with the whole social justice thing. My first contact, interestingly, with this sort of stuff, it wasn't the feminists demonizing men as inherent oppressors of women, nor was it the Black Lives Matter proponents demonizing white people as inherent oppressors of blacks. It was the folks whose oppressed minority is actually one that includes me. That is to say, folks who demonize straight people as inherently oppressing queers. I think queers is the politically correct term now. I can't really keep up, but I'm pretty sure that's where we are. Anyway, the video explicitly said that straight people are the problem, and I remember having a long argument with one of my friends about that. I could scarcely believe that anyone would think that you can combat discrimination by discriminating. How naive I was. So I couldn't find that original video, but then I remembered the video that Tomas sent me, which exemplifies the anti-straight movement even better than that original one did. So, shall we begin? Yeah, it's TEDx, the special needs variant of the already politically challenged TED conferences. Now, our friend here, Mads Anada Lodal, is about to tell us what the topic of his talk is. But before he does that, I want to quickly elaborate on the story that I started about my awakening to the problems of social justice. So, first I was confused about how anyone hoped to solve discrimination by discriminating, but I later learned that that's because discrimination is not really their enemy. Their enemies are the inventions of their vague conspiracy theories. Feminists, for example, believe that their enemy is an invisible entity called patriarchy. To the most devout believers, patriarchy controls every aspect of daily life, oppressing women and advantaging men throughout the world. But aren't anti-feminists just the same? Isn't talking about the supposed ills of feminism just like talking about the supposed ills of patriarchy? No. And that's exactly the difference I'm getting at. Feminists exist, right? People identify as feminists and espouse the beliefs associated with that label. Patriarchists, or whatever, do not. Nobody identifies as a patriarchist. Now, there may be ideologies which do advocate the subjugation of women in some senses, but if so, then attack those ideologies, not the ephemeral spectre of patriarchy that was dreamed up by paranoid identity politicians. The difference between opposing an ideology and creating a conspiracy theory is whether that which you are opposing actually exists. But of course, the fact that patriarchy, by the feminist definition at least, isn't actually real is part of what makes it such a great enemy. If your enemy doesn't even exist, you can paint it as Satan with impunity because no one is there to defend it. And once your movement is only about fighting Satan, well, who could possibly be against that? It's probably not a conscious tactic, just a facet of mimetic evolution. That'd explain why it's a tactic that has been used so often without being understood, dating back at least as far as religion, whose false enemy is literally Satan. But intentional or not, it's pretty fucking insidious if you ask me. Constructing a false enemy in order to justify your ideology? Anyway, this brings us back to the video that we're addressing today.
I'm going to tell you what the straight world order is, and why it has to end.
The straight world order, huh? Okay, so I suspect that had Mads here heard my preamble, he might have called straw man. He might say that this straight world order isn't so much an ideology as a description of a social tendency. People in modern Western society, on some level, expect others to regress to a straight, cisgendered mean, often applying various sorts of social pressure to get them to do so. But if that's all you're referring to, Mads, why is that a bad thing? You'd better provide some solid evidence that this is an inherently harmful aspect of culture. I mean, beyond giving it a scary name.
This is David. When he was a teenager, he had long curly hair and a sway in his hips that made people call him feminine. He liked his looks, but some of the other boys didn't. They called him names and made fun of him, and one time they even ganged up on him to beat up the faggot, as they said. He had kissed another boy one time, but he didn't like it much, and now at 42, he's just a normal heterosexual man. He cut his hair short and learned to stiffen his hips when he walks, so people don't bother him anymore.
First thing, if you're going to introduce us to a new concept, maybe try using some verifiably real examples, rather than these carefully constructed hypotheticals. Might strengthen your case. Anyway, let's take a look at the major points in David's story. He used to look feminine. Some people at school disliked this look. Some of those that disliked this look teased him. Some of those that teased him also beat him up. He stopped himself from looking feminine. Now, I'll agree that this story is sad. Kids at school can be rather cruel in their teasing, and physically attacking someone is obviously a horrible thing. However, this is meant to show us how bad the straight world order is, which is just those preferences and expectations up in step 2 there. Not conforming to them may have been the excuse these particular bullies used, but that doesn't mean that these preferences and expectations are themselves bad. School kids tease and bully one another for all sorts of reasons. A kid might get beaten up out of jealousy for getting a higher grade than another kid. This doesn't mean grading papers is bad. So let's remove the bullying and see if we still have such a sad story. Well, now what we have is a kid who just made some personal changes for the sake of fitting in, which Nose Ring here might inherently have a problem with, but I hope that most people see that this is just a decision that some people make when they value their relationships with the people around them more than the clothes they wear. You can't tell someone they're wrong to have their own personal preferences, and you can't tell someone else they're wrong for wanting to fulfill those preferences. These expectations are not to blame for violence. The violent people are to blame for violence. Now, if the straight world order were an ideology with tenets that include being violent towards those who fail to meet your expectations, that's a different story. Perhaps if there was a book that the ideology was based on that specified such tenets, then that ideology could be to blame. But if the straight world order is an ideology, then the fact that you fucking made it up starts to get in the way, doesn't it? All right. Next trumped-up piece of propaganda, please. Next example, please.
This is Robin. She's born in a female body and a girl's body, but she can't identify much with the traditional ideas of femininity. She prefers to be somewhere in between genders. She also wears her hair short and dresses more or less like a construction worker. When she has to use a public bathroom, she has the choice to be shouted at in the women's room or sexually harassed in the men's room.
Whoa! Why are you assuming that women will only shout at a manly woman in the restroom, whereas men will sexually assault her? Oh, come off it, Danny. People generally only sexually assault the gender that they're attracted to. Sure, there might be the odd lesbian in a woman's restroom who could pose a danger, but it's reasonable to assume that most people are straight and... oh God, abort! Abort!
One time, a group of drunken men threatened to find out for themselves if Robin was a man or a woman.
This is what I mean when I say that this talk Godwins itself. Not only does he have his made-up conspiracy theory to parallel the Jewish conspiracy, but he's even pegging that conspiracy on one specific group. Specifically in this case, straight cis men. I wouldn't be surprised if that's expanded to straight white cis men by the end of this. Why do I say that? Well, for the rest of the talk, just keep an ear out for him describing straight white cis men as anything other than perpetrators, and anyone who falls outside of that class of Untermensch as anything other than a victim. I hereby predict that that will not happen. I know it won't, because I've watched this, but I did predict that on my first watch through, and for that matter, hey, subscribers, you already predicted that too, didn't you? Yeah. You know what's going on.
Louise, on the other hand, loves being feminine. She loves to wear short skirts and tight tops and lipstick. Sometimes men comment on her looks. They say things like, "Hey, beautiful, smile for me."
Yeah, I hate it when people tell me to smile. It's like, I'll cheer up if and when I feel like it, okay? Right? Yeah, it happens to me. It's not an uncommon thing for people to tell you to cheer up. Oh, right, but I don't get called beautiful at the same time. That's what makes a minor annoyance into a systemic oppression, isn't it? A compliment.
Or, "You'd look pretty if you lost a little weight."
Commenting on a woman's weight has been considered socially taboo since always. If you're trying to criticize a culture as being part of or containing the straight world order, why on earth are you using things that are discouraged by that culture?
No matter the nature of the comments, they always make Louise feel uncomfortable, and sometimes she's scared that people might do something worse to her.
Rape! That's what you're talking about, right? Yeah, well, sometimes people are justified in being concerned that certain situations may be unsafe, and thus fear being mugged. Or murdered. Or raped, but I wonder why she's constantly afraid of such a specific crime. Could it be that there are some folks who are constantly painting men as inherently rapey? Or some people who dishonestly inflate rape statistics, cough cough 1 in 5? Or perhaps there are those who imply that a woman going into a men's restroom, as often happens, by the way, as opposed to the other way around, is bound to result in sexual assault. Food for thought.
None of these three people are LGBT people. None of them are lesbians, gays, bisexuals, or transgender, but all of them are in conflict with what I call the straight world order. A place that puts heterosexuality, traditional gender roles, and men at the top.
As I predicted, men are the bad guys here. This isn't the first time someone has hidden their hatred of a specific demographic behind a conspiracy theory, by the way. And no, I'm not comparing you to Nazis again. I'm comparing you to communists, which troublingly, I'm sure you find less damning. Anyway, they didn't blame the bourgeoisie for capitalism, the Marxist conception of capitalism, not the real one. Just like you don't blame men for the straight world order. It's something everyone is complicit in, I'm sure. It just happens to benefit bourgeoisie, or men, and oppress everyone else. Except, if someone is propagating a system which oppresses them, then they must have some internalized victimhood, and so can't really be blamed. Whereas if someone is perpetuating a system which benefits them, well, then they're just acting in their self-interest, and so they can be blamed. You don't say you're blaming an entire demographic for traits they were born with. You just design your conspiracy theory in such a way that blaming them is the only logical conclusion.
I could have told you about the lesbian teacher who's scared to come out to her pupils, or the trans woman who got knocked down with a hammer, but it is obvious that LGBT people are in conflict with the straight world order.
Obvious? That must be why you haven't bothered to substantiate its existence in any way.
And my point today is that I believe that a majority of all the people is actually in conflict with the straight world order.
I want to hammer this home one more time. Just make sure I've explained it fully. The straight world order. If you define it as simply as the expectation of and preference for those who conform to a cisgendered heterosexual norm, then it is totally valid. And arguably, as you say, most people will, to some degree, not conform to it perfectly. But that is not a problem. There's nothing wrong or immoral about having a personal preference. I mean, wasn't the gay rights movement meant to be about saying that you can't be immoral for having a personal preference? However, if you're defining it that simply, then the straight world order, well, A, has a comically over-dramatized sounding name, and B, is not an ideology, and so it can't command violence, and so it can't be blamed for it. Only violent people and their actual ideologies can be.
I have been violently attacked around 10 times for being a queer person.
Evidence, dude. I did a quick Google search for your name and I couldn't find any evidence of you being attacked. Now, that doesn't mean that your claims are false. It just means that you might have filed a police report about them, but not wanted to talk to the media. Forgive me for being suspicious about that, though, but
You do seem like the type who would be more than happy to publicise anything you could present as an attack based on your sexuality, but I'll take it at face value, at least the claim that you have been violently attacked 10 times. So, how are you so sure that it was because you're queer? If you have any evidence of this, why are you not presenting it? You have to know that that would massively strengthen your case. The fact that you've been entirely avoiding talking about anything verifiable is mighty suspicious. But if we go out on a particularly tenuous limb and assume you really were attacked 10 times for your sexuality, then how have you determined that the culprit is the straight world order and not another ideology? For one possible example, you live in Copenhagen, which, thanks to the unfettered influx of economic migrants and refugees, is now one of the Muslimist of the large European cities. At this point, 1 in every 10 Copenhagen residents is a Muslim. Islam is virulently anti-gay. There is no way of reading these passages from the Quran without making crystal clear the ideology's position on how to treat those of atypical sexuality. What's that? I haven't enough evidence to say that these individuals were Muslims? Great! Now apply that same skepticism when you're claiming that the attackers were part of the straight world order.
and I have stopped counting the times when strangers spit or shout at me in the street.
Spit on? I mean, this might sound like a bit of a stretch, but that's a very strange thing for someone to do, especially someone raised in a Western culture, even someone atypical enough to commit assault. There are, however, some cultures where it's a bit more of a common way of expressing disrespect. The Islam thing that I initially brought up was supposed to be rhetorical, in order to show you that you should have evidence before you declare an ideology or guilty of a hate crime, just as you should a person. But the evidence in favour of the attackers, if they exist at all, acting on behalf of that particular ideology, is actually growing. After all, in the only examples I can find of people getting spit on for their sexuality in Copenhagen, or elsewhere in Europe, the culprits are refugees from Islamic countries. Again, I'm not saying that I know your attackers, if they exist, were acting on behalf of Islam, even though that would explain why you, the final boss of Victim Complex Adventures, wouldn't have publicised them. But anyway, I'm not saying that Islam was necessarily to blame. I'm just saying that there's more evidence for that than for your hypothesis about the ideology you made up. So if you think that my hypothesis is out there and unlikely, well, take a look at yours.
For the last 10 years and still today, I have been writing articles and giving lectures to young people about queer theory, queer politics. And you might think that makes me an expert at being gay, but if anything, it makes me an expert at understanding normal.
So, okay, you're saying things are easier to understand from the outside. By that logic, someone who has written from a traditionalist, pro-straight perspective, say Pat Robertson, would be an expert on being queer. No. You'd be the expert on that too. You are the expert on many things. I guess that's why you don't have to provide any evidence or even a single verifiable example of anything you say.
Queer means a lot of different things, but something that is central to the queer perspective is to turn the focus away from the people who deviate from the straight norm onto the straight norm itself. To stop asking questions like, why do people become gay? And why do gays have to act like that? And start asking the big question, how did normal become normal? That is, how did the straight norm become so strong and so integrated into every part of our lives, our societies, our relationships, and ourselves, that for us to even begin to understand what the straight world order is like asking a fish to describe water.
It seems that it's like asking a fish to understand water, because it is like that. The estimates on how much of the world is LGBT, God, I hate that term, vary but are usually around 1%. Some things are considered normal because they are.
However, the straight world order is a never-ending list of expectations to everything regarding sex, gender, and sexuality, and a variety of punishments that happen to those who fail to live up to these expectations.
Okay, this is what I was referring to earlier on in the video. You have expectations about people. In fact, it would be pretty much impossible for you not to. But those expectations are not inherently linked to any kind of punishment. No matter how hard you try to link them by placing them both under the same umbrella with a scary name. Let's take a look at your examples of these expectations and see how this works.
We expect boys to climb trees and girls to wear dresses.
Which is entirely justified. Boys tend to prefer some things and girls tend to prefer others. There's nothing wrong with noticing a trend and calibrating our expectations based on it. And don't go down the societal conditioning route with this either. There is strong evidence that even monkeys have typical gendered behaviours that we would expect. Next.
We expect women to want to have children.
Because women do tend to want to have children. Hence all the humans around. Again, this is a justified expectation which doesn't necessarily lead to any bad actions. Next.
And to be patient and soft-spoken and smile.
Not always, but I'd say there is at least a more common preference amongst both men and women for women to be a little bit more meek than the man they're with. Is this a problem? Are we shaming people for their sexual preferences now? Next.
We expect men to constantly be looking for sex.
No, we don't. We don't expect that. Bringing up anything too explicitly sexual is considered at least rude in more circumstances than not. At the workplace, in the classroom, at dinner, depending on the company you're with. And even if this was true, people are allowed to have their expectations whether or not you approve of them. Next.
And we expect sex when we take someone home from a party.
Yeah, because that's generally why you would go home with someone you meet at a party. Maybe your problem here is you think that because someone has an expectation of you, you have to fulfill it. You don't. Next.
And then we have very clear expectations of what we expect to find when they take off their underwear.
Jesus Christ, is that a problem? I'll assume you're talking about trans people going home with someone who is surprised to find that the contents don't match the packaging. If you intentionally make yourself look like a vagina owner, people are going to assume you have a vagina.
We don't expect to see female truck drivers or male nurses.
Okay, I'm done with your expectations. The response will always be, people are entitled to their expectations, and expectations don't necessarily lead to bad actions. Only bad people and bad ideologies lead to bad actions. Also, just about all of the expectations on your list are totally justified. Some norms are simply norms because they're normal. Actually normal. Now, I understand that you're going to try to imply that because people notice these trends and even have a preference towards people who fit into them, that this will result in bad actions towards those who don't. So I'm going to skip ahead to the punishments that your conspiracy theory posits.
When you deviate from the straight norm, the punishment can be violence.
Get a fucking grip. In Western society, anyone who is violent, especially if it's for bigoted reasons, is repudiated by the vast majority of people. We've even created a system for punishing violence. It's called the law. In Denmark, where you are, anti-LGBT crimes are legally considered hate crimes, and the majority of Denmark is in favour of keeping it that way. Now, not to harp on this point too much, but there is a growing section of your population that is not so in favour of those laws and whose ideology actually promotes the committing of these hate crimes. Forget about it.
Or it can be legal and financial inequality.
Oh, this was well timed. Those hate crime laws? They weren't set up to protect straight people. If anything, LGBT people have legal superiority. Oh, and financial inequality. You earn as much as you earn. It's called capitalism, and it's responsible for providing enough wealth for societies that embrace it that you can even be there, wasting your time bitching about groups of people you don't like.
It can be spitting.
Spitting. It's nowhere near conclusive, but it is a telltale sign.
Shouting, threatening. It can be name-calling, bullying, sexual harassment.
Now, I don't want to respond individually to every one of those. They're all either silly complaints or that warrant me repeating myself about expectations not leading to actions. Sometimes both. Feel free to go back and see which one's which for yourself.
It can be more subtle. People who stare at you.
Yeah, I'm going to skip through the rest of the punishments too, because I don't think we're getting anywhere. But I just want to highlight that one there. Yes, people are more likely to look at something that is uncommon. A bloke in a dress does qualify as uncommon, by the way. How am I having to explain this to you?
In Copenhagen, in the last 10 years, I have seen 3 gay couples in public. 3. I see 3 straight couples every minute. And still straight people have the guts to come up to me and tell me they don't have anything against gay people, but why do we have to shove it in their face?
I'll save that clip for later.
We also expect people who deviate to want to fit in, to want to become normal. But in the face of the straight world order, let me just say this. I don't want to be normal.
But you do. Someone who doesn't want to be normal is someone who doesn't mind flaunting people's expectations, usually no matter what people think of them as a result. People who do want to be normal want their appearance and their behaviour to match other people's expectations. You are definitely in the latter camp, but instead of deciding to change yourself, as most of those sorts of people do, you expect everyone else's expectations to change to match your behaviour. You're not a rebel. You're a conformist. It's just that you have a new, not yet popular brand of conformity that you're trying to sell.
I didn't come here today to defend myself. I didn't come to defend homosexuals, or women, or transgendered people. I came today to attack. I came to declare a war today on the straight world order.
What did I tell you?
I may be at war with the straight world order, but I am at peace with myself. And the first thing I do every morning when I wake up is to thank the universe and the stars that I am a faggot.
I'm glad you're so happy about your sexuality, but I'm also glad that most people are also happy about theirs and openly share their preferences. Are you also glad about this?
I am disgusted, not by heterosexuals, but by the straight world order, and I want no part of it. No thank you.
I'll take that as a no. Let's remember what the straight world order is. Either it's an ideology which is responsible for violence against LGBT people, in which case you'd better prove it exists, otherwise you're just saying you're not against Jews as such, only the vast Jewish conspiracy which controls the world. Or the straight world order is simply a spoopy name you gave to the fact that straight, cisgendered, sex-typical people openly prefer other straight, cisgendered, sex-typical people. In which case, when you say this...
I am disgusted, not by heterosexuals, but by the straight world order.
It's no different from when people say...
They don't have anything against gay people, but why do we have to shove it in their face?
So which is it? Are you a conspiracy theorist or a bigot?
The straight world order is a hierarchy that puts the heterosexual, masculine man who is not transgendered at the top and gets everyone in trouble who cannot be like, or be liked by him.
Based on that, and the fact you've provided no verifiable example to substantiate anything you've said, I'm leaning towards conspiracy theorist.
Out of these three people, only one of them managed to stay out of trouble. That was David. And the only way for him to get out of trouble was to cut his hair short and learn to be more masculine. And in this way, punish himself so that others wouldn't.
Well, now it seems like you're bemoaning the fact that your hypothetical guy chose to fit in with a crowd you don't like. I'm leaning back towards bigot.
The two women didn't have that option. Robin, she got in trouble for not being what some might call a real woman, whatever that is. And Louise, well, she got in trouble for being one.
So this straight world order gives you license to consider a victim everyone except cisgendered heterosexual males, thus making that group the only real perpetrators, as I pointed out earlier. Well, that's certainly convenient, because if it turned out that straight world order didn't exist, or it turned out to be just people expressing their sexual preferences, that'd make you a massive fucking bigot, wouldn't it?
And this right here, this explains why I believe that most people will get in trouble with the straight world order if they aren't already. This right here, because there is really only one tiny little space where people won't bother you, where you can be safe, and that is if you can be a heterosexual, masculine man who is not transgendered.
I think you just did the social justice equivalent of what my alt-right friends call naming the Jew.
Add to this that sex, gender, and sexuality are really only 3 digits in an enormous equation of privilege, also including hierarchies regarding race, ethnicity, class, age, citizenship, beauty standards, educational levels, and whether or not you have a disability.
Making sure you don't get attacked by all of the other corners of the intersectional infinigon, huh? Smart. Cowardly, but smart.
So there's a whole lot of trouble and punishment going on in the straight world order. But who are the victims? And who are the bad guys, you might ask? And the answer is really simple. We all are. We are all being terribly limited by the straight world order, but at the same time, we also, all of us, contribute to the upholding of it.
That's much more egalitarian than I expected. From you. I mean, it doesn't contradict anything I've said, but it sounds like you're at least reining it in a bit.
Although some of us are definitely more oppressed, and some more oppressive than others.
Never mind.
Let me give you an example.
What?
Let me give you an example.
That's what I thought you said. Okay, now that was unexpected. It's a bit late in your talk to be finally bringing up something concrete, but better late than never, I guess, so go ahead.
In Denmark, 97% of those convicted of violence are men.
2 situations. In the first, a woman strikes a man. In the second, a man strikes a woman with precisely the same force. Which situation do you think is more likely to be reported to the police? I think we both know the answer. Hell, even if a woman strikes another woman, it probably won't be reported to the police unless it's incredibly grievous. But the violence of a man, even against another man, is far more likely to be reported and result in a conviction than any violence from a woman. But of course, you'll take this into account and correct for it, won't you?
That means that almost every single person who is violent towards other people is a man.
No.
Of course, statistics never tell the whole story.
Oh wait, maybe!
And this one fails to mention that many of the victims of men's violence are other men.
Nope.
Now, I'm not saying that only men do the punishing or that all men are bad guys, because it's not like that. But there is a clear tendency, though, that the punishments come from the tip of the norm, the tip of the hierarchy, and trickle down through all the deviating positions. And the more you deviate, that is, the further away from the norm that you are, the harder the punishment gets.
Now I see why you avoided anything empirical up till now. As soon as you try to make an actual testable claim based on your hypothesis, we can all see clearly whether it matches reality or not, and it doesn't. The punishments seem to be going to men mostly, don't they? Much more than women. And aren't women meant to be further down, and thus receiving harsher punishments? What's worse is that you presented the stats yourself, and somehow you didn't notice that they completely contradict your conspiracy theory. What is self-awareness?
So, what would I like you to do about it?
You haven't demonstrated that the straight world order exists in any form that's a problem, and so you're in no position to present a solution. I'll play one item from your list of demands, though, because there is an important point that I want to drive home there.
And then I would like you to be aware of it when you have certain expectations to people's sex, gender, and sexuality, and realize that they might not live up to your expectations, and that that's not a problem, that is not a threat to you.
And our expectations are not a threat to them. Moving on.
This is Cecilia. 4 months ago, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon right here in central Copenhagen, Denmark, actually around this hour of the day, a few hundred meters away from where I'm standing now, she was on the way from her hairdresser when everything suddenly went black. A man had hit her full force on the back of her head with a hammer because she's transgendered. This was the kind of punishment that the straight world order had in store for her.
That was a mistake. You just said a first name, a description of the attack, and posted a picture. That's enough for me to find the incident in question and see if once again your picture comes into direct contrast with reality. First, the idea that this attack was based on the victim's status as a tranny is highly suspect. This perpetrator denies that that was the motive, so it's his word against hers. And his word is the one I'd actually lean towards, because he was smiling and happy to confess to the crime. It seems strange that the goddamned psycho would lie about the motive, which he says was simply that she had called him a mogperker. I'll come back to what that means. Whereas Cecilia didn't seem to have any way to know why the attack happened, and could have just understandably wanted her attacker to face the harsher penalty that a hate crime against her gender identity would carry in Denmark. So, we now have the level of evidence that you apparently require before you'll consider something a hate crime. And I'd say that puts your 10 into even more suspicion. And even if this attack was because of her being trans, how would you chalk that up to the straight world order? This kind of act is opposed by pretty much everyone in Denmark, and the entire Western world for that matter. It's not something that the society cultivates. There's no evidence that there is even a significant subculture in Denmark that would have been happy about this. Except maybe one. The attacker claimed this was because he was called a mogperker. While Google doesn't translate this word as a whole, we soon find out why if we translate the parts. Mog is shit, and perker is a slang term for Persians or Turkish people. According to some people I've asked to actually speak the language, the word mogperker is often used for anyone who comes from the Middle East or near it, but in any case, this attacker was from an Islamic country. So, even if we make the tenuous assumption that this was a gender identity-based attack, the ideology that you should be looking at as the culprit is not that bullshit you dreamed up to bolster your victim complex, but the explicitly sexually authoritarian one that actually fucking exists.
Normal becomes normal when many people act normal. David actually managed to climb to the very top of the hierarchy, but he had to cut his hair off to get there. He made a choice to fit in and to act normal. And of course, everyone is free to make their own choices, but you should know that when you choose to hide that little part of you that deviates from the straight norm, that is a choice that you make for other people too. By choosing to make the norm that bit stronger by hiding, you make life a little bit harder for those who don't have the choice to simply fit in.
Okay, listen to me carefully. Fuck collectivism. Don't make your personal decisions based on how the broader cultural effects of every little action you take will ripple out through society. Make them as an individual. And expect others to do the same. If you strengthen some norm by conforming to it, more power to you. You care about fitting in, and however many slogans tell you that's a bad thing, it isn't. It may make that norm more normal, that's true, But you should expect anyone who doesn't want to fit in to also be individualistic enough to make their own decision about deviating from that norm, however ubiquitous it is. Mads, or however you're meant to say this presenter's name, he's about to tell you something, and that thing is probably true. But think about who or what is to blame for this.
What happened to David and Robin and Louise is bad enough. It really is. But for a lot of people, and for a lot of my personal friends, this is what they fear every single day of their lives.
For the strength of Allah, we will ride to the gates of the paradise where our maidens await. We are men who love death more than you love your life. We're the soldiers that fight in the day and the night. We're the soldiers that fight in the day and the night. But yeah, I'm sure the real thing that LGBT people have to worry about is that straight world order bullshit.
Cecilia is out there every single day fighting in the face of all this harassment and violence. And while she gets in trouble just for being herself, David actually contributes to her trouble by choosing to be the short-haired, masculine version of himself. Had he kept his long hair and that sway in his hips like he wanted to, that would have been a tiny, tiny step towards a world with more diversity.
That's fucking terrifying, Mads. You're actually taking a guy, real or not, who made his own choices about whether he cared more about his friends or his hair. He chose the former, and now you're blaming him for violent attacks. All in the name of achieving your vision of an ideal world of diversity. I'm done. Nobody who watched to this point will have any doubt that my comparing you to fascists was actually pretty fair. So get out of my shitty Honda Fit.
My name is Mads Ananda Lodal, and I can't even think straight.